The day my in-laws demanded our house as their anniversary gift started like any other Sunday morning. I was in our kitchen, the warm September sunlight streaming through the windows I'd personally restored, when they dropped their bomb over brunch. I'm Iris, and until that moment, I thought I understood how privileged I was to be part of the Hudson family. My husband Clyde and I had spent 3 years renovating this Victorian house, transforming it from a neglected shell into our dream home. Every squeaky floorboard, every painted wall, every carefully chosen light fixture told our story. "Darling!" Margaret, my mother-in-law, set down her mimosa glass with that practiced elegance she'd perfected over decades of country club memberships. "Dawn and I have been thinking about our upcoming 40th anniversary." I smiled, whisking eggs for an omelet. "That's wonderful! Clyde and I were just discussing what to get you both." "Oh, there's no need." Don waved his hand dismissively. "We know exactly what we want." His eyes traveled around our kitchen, lingering on the copper pots hanging from the rack I'd installed myself. This house would make the perfect anniversary gift. The whisk clattered against the bowl. "I'm sorry, what?" "The house, dear," Margaret repeated, as if explaining to a child. "It would make such a lovely weekend retreat for us, and you and Clyde could find something more suitable for young couples." I looked at Clyde, expecting him to laugh this off. Instead, he was studying his coffee cup with unusual intensity. "This is our home," I said carefully. "We've put everything into it." Don's expression hardened. "Everything?" "As I recall, the down payment came from our wedding gift to you both, which we're eternally grateful for," I replied, my hands gripping the counter. "But we've paid every mortgage payment ourselves, done all the renovations." "With our connections," Margaret interjected. "Who found you the contractor, the landscaper?" "We paid for those services." I felt my voice rising. "And I did half the work myself." "Clyde, darling!" Margaret turned to her son. "Surely you see the sense in this. Your father and I aren't getting any younger. Having us closer would be wonderful for everyone." Finally, Clyde looked up. "Mom, I don't think—" "Think about your future in the family business," Don cut in. "About the legacy we're building. Some sacrifices are expected." My stomach churned. "Sacrifice? This isn't a sacrifice, it's robbery." "Iris!" Clyde's voice held a warning note I'd never heard before. Margaret's face took on that wounded expression she'd perfected. "We're only thinking of the family's best interests. Really, Iris, this hostility is most unexpected." "Hostility?" I laughed incredulously. "You're asking us to give you our home as a gift." "A gesture of gratitude," Don corrected, "for everything we've done for you both." I turned to Clyde, desperate. "Tell them this is crazy." But Clyde wouldn't meet my eyes. "Maybe we should discuss this later," he mumbled. "There's nothing to discuss," I stated firmly. "This is our home. It's not for sale or gifting." Don stood up, his 6'2" frame towering over the breakfast table. "I see you need time to consider this properly. Clyde, son, perhaps you could help your mother and me understand why your wife is being so difficult about this reasonable request." "Reasonable?" I sputtered, but Clyde was already nodding. "I'll talk to her, Dad." The eggs were cold now, forgotten in their bowl. Margaret rose gracefully, adjusting her pearl necklace. "We'll leave you to it then. Do think carefully, dear," she added, patting my cheek. "Family harmony is so precious." After they left, the kitchen felt colder somehow. Clyde still wouldn't look at me. "You can't seriously be considering this," I said. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They have a point about family obligations, Iris." "Obligations? To give away our home? They've done so much for us." "And that means they own us." I felt tears threatening, but forced them back. "This is our home, Clyde. We built this together." He finally met my gaze, and what I saw there scared me more than his parents' demand. Uncertainty. Weakness. "Just think about it, okay?" As he walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with cold eggs and shattered Sunday peace, I realized this wasn't just about a house. This was about power, about control, about the price of belonging to the Hudson family. And for the first time since I'd married Clyde, I wondered if that price might be too high. They want your what? Gemma nearly spilled her latte across the cafe table. 3 days had passed since that disastrous Sunday brunch, and I desperately needed my best friend's perspective. Our house, as an anniversary gift. I wrapped my hands around my cooling coffee. And Clyde, he's actually considering it. That's insane. Gemma leaned forward, her eyes wide. What did you say when he brought it up again? That's just it. He's barely speaking to me. I pushed my untouched muffin away. He's been coming home late, saying he's working, but I know he's been having dinner with his parents. At their mansion, I assume. Gemma's tone dripped with sarcasm. While plotting how to take your home? Yesterday I found real estate listings on his laptop. My voice cracked. For smaller houses, apartments even. Oh, honey. Gemma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Have you reminded him about all the work you've put into that house? The garden you planted? The nursery you were planning to design? The mention of the nursery made my chest tight. I tried. Last night, actually. Remember when we painted the living room? I'd said, watching Clyde loosen his tie. How we argued for hours about the perfect shade of blue? Iris, please. He'd sighed that new, heavy sigh. Not tonight. When did you stop fighting for us? The words had tumbled out before I could stop them. He'd turned, his expression hardening. This isn't about us. It's about family loyalty. We're supposed to be a family, too. I gestured at the walls around us. This is our home, Clyde, our future. My parents have a point about starting fresh, he'd replied. Something more practical. Practical? I'd laughed bitterly. Like that massive pool house they barely use? The tennis court that's gathering dust? They've earned their success, he'd snapped. And everything I am, everything we have, is because of them. No. I'd stepped closer, forcing him to look at me. Everything we have is because we worked for it, together. Or have you forgotten that too? He'd grabbed his keys then, heading for the door. I'm having dinner with them. Don't wait up. And he just left? Gemma's outrage pulled me back to the present. What happened to the man who proposed to you in that broken-down house, promising to build a life together? His parents happened. I wiped away a stray tear. Dawn called this morning, said they're hosting a family dinner tomorrow night to discuss the situation properly. You're not going, are you? I have to. I straightened my shoulders. If I don't show up, they'll use it against me. Paint me as the difficult, ungrateful daughter-in-law. Then we need a plan. Gemma pulled out her phone. My cousin James works in financial advisory. He knows all about these old money families and their methods. What do you mean? Think about it, Iris. Why would they suddenly want your house? They have 3 other properties. Gemma's eyes narrowed. Something's not adding up. Don mentioned the family business. I remembered his pointed comment about Clyde's future. Exactly. Gemma was already typing. James can do some digging, discreetly. These types of families often have secrets they'd rather keep buried. I don't know. I hesitated. Using their secrets against them feels wrong. More wrong than them trying to bully you out of your home? Gemma raised an eyebrow. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. My phone buzzed. A text from Clyde. Mom wants to know what you're wearing tomorrow night. Please make an effort. Something snapped inside me. 3 years of trying to fit into their world, of polite smiles and careful words, of watching my husband slowly transform into their puppet. Make that call, I told Gemma. I want to know everything. She squeezed my hand again. That's my girl. And Iris? Wear that red dress tomorrow night. You know, the one Margaret said was a bit much for Easter dinner. For the first time in days, I smiled. The one with the low back? Exactly. If they want war, let's give them something to really clutch their pearls about. As I walked home later, my steps felt lighter. The Hudsons had always wielded their power through fear and obligation. Maybe it was time to show them they weren't the only ones who could play that game. looking up at our house. My house. I made a promise to myself. They might have money and influence, but I had something stronger. The truth of what this home meant, and the determination to protect it. Tomorrow night would be interesting indeed. James's office wasn't what I expected. No mahogany desk or pretentious art, just a clean, modern space with city views and walls of financial charts. He looked more like a college professor than a financial advisor, with rolled-up sleeves and reading glasses perched on his head. "Gemma filled me in," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I've been looking into your in-laws' financial activities. There are irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" He pulled up several documents on his computer screen. "Their company's been making some desperate moves lately. Selling properties below market value, taking out high-interest loans." "But they seem so wealthy." I leaned forward, studying the numbers. The parties, the cars, the donations to charity. Image is everything to families like this. James clicked through more documents. They're masters at maintaining appearances. But look here. They've mortgaged their main residence 3 times in the past year. My heart raced. Are they in trouble? They're underwater. He removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes. And from what I can tell, they're running out of assets to leverage. "Except our house," I whispered. "Bingo!" He nodded. "A free property would give them breathing room. They could mortgage it, use it as collateral." My phone buzzed. Another text from Clyde. "Where are you? Mom's been calling." I told them I had a dentist appointment, I muttered, silencing my phone. James leaned back in his chair. "There's more. Their company's been using some creative accounting methods. Nothing explicitly illegal, but definitely in the gray area." "Can you prove it?" "With the right documentation? Yes." He hesitated. "But Iris, be careful. People like this, when cornered—" "They're already trying to take my home," I interrupted. "What's worse than that?" He handed me a USB drive. "Everything I found is here. But there's a gap in the records. Something about a private account in the Caymans. If we could access those files—" "Clyde has a home office," I said slowly. "He keeps company documents there." "Just be careful," James warned. "And remember, knowledge is power, but timing is everything." I clutched the USB drive. "Thank you, really." "Don't thank me yet." He smiled grimly. "The hard part's still coming." That evening, I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, smoothing down the red dress. The backless design was daring without being inappropriate. Exactly the kind of thing that would make Margaret purse her lips in disapproval. Clyde appeared in the doorway. "You're wearing that? You don't like it?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It's a family dinner, not a cocktail party." "Funny, I thought it was an ambush." I applied another coat of lipstick. "Iris, please." He moved closer. "They're trying to be reasonable about this." "Reasonable?" I turned to face him. "Do you even hear yourself?" "They've done everything for us." "Have they?" I interrupted. "Or have they done everything to control us?" His jaw tightened. "You don't understand how things work in my family." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I grabbed my clutch. "Shall we go? Wouldn't want to keep them waiting." The drive to their mansion was silent. As we pulled up to the grand entrance, I noticed 3 other expensive cars already parked outside. "Who else is here?" I asked. "Just Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia," Clyde replied, "and Cousin Thomas." My stomach dropped. They'd invited witnesses to our humiliation. Margaret opened the door before we could ring the bell, perfect in her designer dress and pearls. "Darling!" She air-kissed Clyde's cheeks before turning to me. Her smile flickered at my dress. "Iris! How festive!" Dawn appeared behind her, drink in hand. "Everyone's in the dining room, shall we?" As we walked through their marble-floored hallway, I caught glimpses of their carefully curated wealth. The antiques, the artwork, the crystal chandeliers. But now, thanks to James, I saw something else. A facade cracking at the edges. "Before dinner, Don announced once we were all seated. We wanted to discuss something as a family. I felt everyone's eyes turn to me. Margaret dabbed her lips with her napkin. Don straightened his tie, and Clyde stared at his empty plate. The USB drive felt heavy in my clutch. I thought of James's warning about timing, about the documents in Clyde's office I still needed to find. So I smiled, channeling every lesson in poise Margaret had ever given me. "Of course," I said sweetly. "Family discussions are so important, aren't they? Let them think they had the upper hand. Let them believe I was backing down, for now." The family dinner was excruciating. Between Margaret's pointed comments about young couples needing fresh starts and Don's thinly veiled threats about Clyde's position in the company, I barely touched my food. But it was Uncle Robert's casual remark that caught my attention. "Shame about that development project in Miami," he said, swirling his wine. "Those investors must be getting nervous." Don's knuckles whitened around his fork. "Nothing to concern ourselves with." That night, while Clyde slept, I crept into his home office. The moonlight cast strange shadows through the window as I booted up his computer. My hands trembled as I inserted James's USB drive. "Come on," I whispered, scanning through folders. "Show me what you're hiding." A creak in the hallway made me freeze. Footsteps approached. "Iris!" Clyde's voice was thick with sleep. "What are you doing?" I quickly closed the laptop. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd catch up on some work emails." He frowned. "In the dark?" "I didn't want to wake you with the light." I stood, trying to appear casual. "Coming back to bed?" He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, just don't stay up too late." After he left, I waited 10 minutes before returning to the computer. This time, I found what I was looking for, a folder labeled K-Man Holdings. My phone buzzed. A text from James. "Found something. Meet tomorrow. Urgent." "They're selling assets at a loss," James explained the next day, spreading documents across his desk. "But the money isn't going where it should." "What do you mean?" "Look at these transactions." He pointed to a series of numbers. "They're channeling funds through shell companies, then into private accounts. Classic signs of embezzlement," I finished. Among other things." He leaned back. "Your in-laws aren't just trying to maintain their lifestyle. They're trying to hide money before something big hits." "The Miami project?" He nodded. "It's a house of cards, Iris. And when it falls—" "They want our house as a safety net," I realized. "Something clean they can leverage." "Exactly. But there's more." He pulled out another document. "Remember how they helped with your down payment? Their wedding gift to us. I looked into that transaction. The money came from an investor account, not their personal funds. They basically used other people's money as their gift." My stomach churned. "Does Clyde know?" "Hard to say. But as company vice president, he could be liable if this comes out." I thought of Clyde's recent behavior, his late nights at the office, his anxiety. He knows something's wrong. "The question is," James said carefully, "what are you going to do about it?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Margaret. "Darling," her voice dripped honey, "we're hosting a little gathering tonight. Just family and a few close friends. Do come." "Another dinner?" "Oh no, something more festive. We're celebrating Don's new business venture, 7 o'clock sharp." I caught James's eye. He mouthed, "Miami project?" "We'll be there," I said. After hanging up, I turned to James. "They're planning something. They're accelerating their timeline." He gathered the documents. "Be careful, Iris. People like this, when they're desperate—" "I know." I stood up. "But I need one more thing from Clyde's office. Those Cayman documents could prove everything." "And then what?" I thought of our house, of the life Clyde and I had built, of the future we'd planned. "Then I show my husband exactly what his parents are doing to us." That afternoon, I returned home to find Clyde in his office, surrounded by papers. "You're home early," I said. He looked up, his face haggard. Just reviewing some contracts. I moved closer, recognizing the Cayman Holdings letterhead. Anything interesting? Nothing for you to worry about. He quickly gathered the papers. Mom called about tonight? Yes, another party. Wear something appropriate this time? His voice held an edge. No more games, Iris. Games? I kept my voice steady. I'm not the one playing games, Clyde. He stood abruptly. What's that supposed to mean? You tell me. I met his gaze. What exactly are we celebrating tonight? For a moment, I saw fear flash across his face. Then, his mask slipped back into place. Just be ready by 6:30. As he brushed past me, I caught a glimpse of the papers he was holding. Account numbers, transfer dates, and at the bottom, a familiar signature. Don's. The pieces were falling into place. Now I just needed proof, timing, and courage. Tonight would change everything. The party was in full swing when we arrived. Crystal champagne flutes clinked. Fake laughter echoed off marble walls. And Margaret held court in the center of it all, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Darling! She air-kissed my cheeks. Oh, at least you wore navy tonight. Much more appropriate. I smiled tightly, smoothing down my conservative dress. Wouldn't want to embarrass the family. Dawn appeared, clapping Clyde on the shoulder. Son, come meet the investors. They're eager to hear about Miami. As they walked away, Margaret gripped my arm. A word, dear? She steered me toward the empty conservatory, her nails digging into my skin. The tropical plants cast strange shadows in the dimmed evening light. Ah, I know what you've been doing, she said, dropping her society smile. Meeting with financial advisors, snooping through files. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play coy. It doesn't suit you. She released my arm. We've been more than patient with your resistance. But tonight is important. Don't ruin it. Or what? Or Clyde might find his position in the company becoming rather precarious. Her smile returned, sharp as a blade. Times are tough. Layoffs happen. Are you threatening my husband's career? I'm protecting my family. She adjusted her pearls. Something you clearly don't understand. Before I could respond, a server appeared. Mrs. Hudson? Mr. Hudson is requesting your presence. Think about what really matters, dear. Margaret patted my cheek. Family or pride? I watched her glide away, then pulled out my phone to text James. They know. What now? His response was immediate. Don't show your hand. Wait for my signal. The next hour was torture. I circulated through the crowd, catching snippets of conversation about the Miami project. Revolutionary development, someone said. Guaranteed returns, whispered another. Then I saw him, Thomas, Don's nephew, clearly drunk and angry, confronting Clyde in a corner. You can't do this, Thomas hissed. My clients invested everything. Keep your voice down. Clyde grabbed his arm. We'll discuss this later. There won't be a later when they find out. Everything all right? Don materialized between them. Thomas, perhaps you've had enough champagne. Uncle Don? Thomas swayed slightly. Tell them about the accounts, about what really happened to their money. That's enough. Don's voice carried across the room. Heads turned. My phone buzzed. James, now, check your email. I opened the attachment. Copies of the Cayman documents, wire transfers, everything. My hands shook as I forwarded them to Clyde's email. Don was still dealing with Thomas when Margaret clinked her glass. Everyone, if I could have your attention. Don has an announcement about the Miami project. Clyde's phone chimed. I watched as he checked it, saw his face drain of color. Dad! He called out, his voice strangled. Wait! But Don was already addressing the crowd. Our Miami development represents the future of luxury living. They're lying to you, Thomas suddenly shouted. The money's gone! Chaos erupted. Investors started murmuring. Phones appeared. Questions flew. Don tried to maintain control, but I could see panic in his eyes. Clyde, I touched his arm. We need to talk. Not now. he whispered. Yes, now. I showed him my phone. Look at the dates, the transfers. Your father used our down payment money to pay off other investors. It was never a gift. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the documents. This can't be. It is. And now they want our house to cover their tracks. I took a deep breath. They're not protecting you, Clyde. They're using you. Margaret appeared beside us, her composure cracking. Whatever she's told you, is it true? Clyde turned to her. About the down payment? About Miami? We did what was necessary, she hissed. For the family. The family? I laughed bitterly. You mean your reputation? Your lifestyle? The room had gone quiet. Don stood frozen at the front, Thomas swaying beside him. Investors whispered and pointed. Clyde! Don's voice boomed. Control your wife! But Clyde was still staring at his phone, at the evidence of years of lies. When he looked up, something had changed in his eyes. No, Dad, he said clearly. I don't think I will. Margaret gasped. Don's face turned purple. And in that moment, watching their carefully constructed world begin to crumble, I felt no satisfaction. Only sadness for the family they could have been, if greed hadn't poisoned everything they touched. The night wasn't over yet, but the balance of power had shifted, and there would be no going back. Everyone out! Don's voice thundered through the mansion. Party's over! As shocked guests filed out, whispering and shooting concerned glances, Don rounded on us. My study, now! The walk to his study felt like a death march. Margaret's heels clicked against the marble floors. Clyde's breathing was heavy beside me, and Don's rage radiated off him in waves. He slammed the door behind us. How dare you? How dare you bring this filth into my home? Filth? I stepped forward. You mean the truth? The truth? He laughed harshly. You know nothing about running a business, about maintaining a legacy. I know enough about fraud, I cut in, about using other people's money to maintain your lies. Careful, Margaret warned. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Actually, I do. I pulled out my phone. James Anderson sends his regards. He's quite thorough, you know. Found everything. The shell companies, the missing investor funds, even that interesting account in the Caymans. Don's face went from red to white. You've been spying on us? Like you've been spying on me? I countered. Margaret already admitted you knew about my meetings. Dad? Clyde's voice was quiet but firm. Is it true? About our down payment? We did what was necessary. Don repeated Margaret's earlier words. The company needed liquidity. So you stole from investors? Clyde's voice cracked. Used their money to give us a fake gift? We gave you everything, Margaret exploded. Position, status, connections. No, I interrupted. You gave us chains. Golden ones, but chains nonetheless. You ungrateful little... Don started toward me, but Clyde stepped between us. Don't, he warned. Don't you dare. Son, Don's voice softened. Everything I did for you. For our family. Family? Clyde laughed bitterly. You tried to take our home. You used me to pressure my wife. That's not family. That's manipulation. The house is nothing, Margaret interjected. We can get you something better. With whose money? I asked. The Miami investors? Or are there others we don't know about? Don moved to his desk, pulling out a crystal decanter. His hands shook as he poured. You have no proof. Actually, I forwarded several emails to the large screen mounted on his wall. Documents appeared. Transfer records, account statements, emails discussing the reallocation of investor funds. Where did you get those? Margaret whispered. Clyde's office computer. You taught him well. Keep detailed records of everything. I turned to my husband. Though I don't think you knew exactly what you were recording, did you? Clyde stared at the screen, at his father's signature on damning document after damning document. All those late nights, the secret meetings. I thought we were saving the company. We were! Don slammed his glass down. Sometimes in business. This isn't business. Clyde's voice was ice. This is theft. And now what? Margaret's composure cracked completely. You'll destroy everything? Your own family? You did that yourselves, I said quietly. The moment you decided your lifestyle was worth more than your integrity. Don straightened, adjusting his tie. What do you want? Excuse me? To keep quiet. What's your price? I looked at this man, this titan of industry, now reduced to trying to bribe his own daughter-in-law, and felt only pity. I want you to leave us alone, completely. No more demands, no more manipulation, no more using Clyde as your puppet. And the house? Margaret asked. Is ours. Forever. Don's laugh was ugly. Or what? You'll expose everything? Destroy Clyde's career too? No, Clyde spoke up. I'll do that myself if I have to. Turn myself in, tell the authorities everything. You wouldn't, Margaret gasped. Try me. Clyde took my hand. I'm done being your pawn. The silence that followed was deafening. Don stared at his empty glass, while Margaret sank into a leather chair, her perfect posture finally breaking. 1 week, I said, to start making things right. Return the investor funds, come clean about Miami, or these documents go to the SEC. You're bluffing, Don whispered. Try me. I squeezed Clyde's hand. You taught me well about family loyalty, after all. As we walked out of the study, out of the mansion that had intimidated me for so long, Clyde stopped on the steps. I'm sorry, he said softly, for not seeing it sooner, for almost losing us. Behind us, through the windows, we could see Don and Margaret in the study, their shadows small and defeated against the wall. Let's go home, I said. Our home. And this time, I knew no one would take it from us. 6 days after the party, Clyde and I sat in James's office, watching the news unfold on his computer screen. Hudson Industries announces major restructuring, the headline read. CEO steps down amid financial concerns. They're actually doing it, Clyde murmured, scrolling through the press release. Returning investor funds, admitting to accounting irregularities. Your father's smarter than I thought, James said. Better to control the narrative than wait for it to explode. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Family dinner, tonight, please. I showed it to Clyde. He ran a hand through his hair. We should go. Are you sure? They're still my parents, Iris. His voice cracked slightly. Even after everything. James cleared his throat. Just remember, they're cornered animals right now. Be careful. The mansion felt different that evening, quieter, smaller somehow. The usual army of staff was gone, replaced by a single housekeeper who led us to the dining room. Don and Margaret sat at their massive table, but the usual crystal and china were absent. Instead, there were simple white plates and takeout containers. No cook? Clyde asked, sitting down. We're downsizing, Margaret admitted. Certain adjustments are necessary. Don hadn't looked up from his plate. His usual commanding presence had deflated, like air leaving a balloon. The press release was well done, I said, breaking the awkward silence. Our PR team earned their fee, Don muttered. One last expense. The investors? Clyde asked. Being repaid. Margaret's hands shook as she opened a container. We're selling everything. The vacation homes, the art collection, my jewelry. Everything except this house. Don finally looked up. Though it's mortgaged to the hilt now. And the company? I asked. The board appointed new leadership this morning. Don's laugh was hollow. 30 years of building an empire, gone in a week. You did this to yourselves, Clyde said quietly. Did we? Margaret's voice turned sharp. Or did your wife? Don't. Don cut her off. We agreed. No accusations tonight. Another silence fell. I pushed rice around my plate, remembering all the elaborate meals served here, all the power plays disguised as family dinners. Why did you really want our house? I finally asked. The truth this time. Don and Margaret exchanged glances. It was the only clean asset left, he admitted. No liens, no investigations attached to it. We thought, if everything else fell apart, you'd have a safety net, I finished, at our expense. We were desperate, Margaret whispered. The Miami project was failing. Investors were asking questions. So you decided to sacrifice our future to save yourselves? Clyde's voice rose. Did we mean that little to you? You meant everything! Don slammed his hand on the table. Everything we did was to maintain the legacy, to give you the life you deserved. The life you wanted, Clyde corrected. Did you ever ask what I wanted? Margaret reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Darling, we only wanted control, I interrupted, over everything and everyone. And now? Don spread his hands. Are you satisfied, now that we've lost everything? Not everything, Clyde said softly. You still have a chance to be actual parents, not puppet masters, not social climbers, just parents. Tears slid down Margaret's cheeks, real ones this time, not the calculated drops I'd seen her use at parties. We don't know how. Start by accepting that our house is our home, I said, that Clyde and I make our own decisions. That family isn't about power or money or control. And if we can't? Don asked. Then this is our last dinner together. Clyde stood up. Your choice, Margaret gasped. Don stared at his son, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. The mansion's emptiness seemed to echo around us, filled with the ghosts of parties past and fortunes lost. We'll try, Don finally said, his voice small. If you'll let us. Clyde nodded once, then held out his hand to me. Let's go home. As we walked to our car, I looked back at the mansion. Through the window, I could see Don and Margaret still at their huge table. Two small figures in a house too big for them now. Do you think they meant it? I asked Clyde. About trying? He started the car, the engine humming to life. I don't know, but for the first time in my life, their answer doesn't control mine. We drove home in comfortable silence, leaving behind the wreckage of an empire and the first fragile seeds of something that might, one day, become a real family. If they let it. The autumn breeze rustled through our backyard as I hung the last string of lights. Our house glowed warmly in the dusk, ready for its first real housewarming party. Not the kind with champagne flutes and business talk, but the kind with genuine laughter and comfortable shoes. Need help? Clyde appeared with a ladder. The left side is drooping. As he steadied the ladder, I caught sight of a familiar car pulling into our driveway. Don and Margaret stepped out, looking almost unrecognizable in casual clothes. Margaret clutched a casserole dish instead of her usual designer purse. We're not too early, are we? She asked, hesitating at the garden path. Right on time, I said, climbing down. The others will be here soon. They followed us inside, where the difference between then and now struck me again. No catered appetizers or crystal glasses, just homemade food and mismatched plates. The furniture we'd chosen together, the walls we'd painted ourselves. Margaret set her dish on the kitchen counter. I made it myself, she said quietly. First time in 30 years. The cookbook was dusty. Mom, Clyde's voice held surprise. You cooked? Well, tried to. She smiled nervously. No promises about the taste. Don stood awkwardly by the kitchen island, hands in his pockets. He looked smaller in jeans and a sweater, more human somehow. The doorbell rang. Gemma arrived with James, followed by other friends. Soon our house filled with the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with central heating. This is nice, Don said later, watching people mingle in our living room. Different, but nice. Different is good, I replied, handing him a beer instead of his usual scotch. Iris, he cleared his throat. About everything that happened. Don't. I shook my head. Tonight's not about that. No, let me finish. He set down his untouched beer. I was wrong. About everything. The house, the company, the way we treated you both. pride, and greed? They blind you to what really matters. Before I could respond, Clyde called everyone to gather around. He stood in the center of our living room, holding up his glass. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he started, "especially my parents." Don and Margaret exchanged surprised glances. "This past year has been transformative," Clyde continued. "We lost some things: status, money, illusions. But we gained something more valuable." He looked at his parents. "We gained truth. And maybe, just maybe, we're building something real." "To truth," Gemma raised her glass, winking at me. "And to home," I added, watching Margaret dab at her eyes with a paper napkin instead of her usual silk handkerchief. Later, as guests began leaving, Margaret pulled me aside. "The nursery upstairs. Are you still planning to decorate it?" I nodded, my hand unconsciously touching my stomach. We hadn't told anyone yet. "I'd like to help," she said quickly. "Not with money. We don't have much of that anymore. But maybe with time. If you'd let me." I thought of all the times she'd tried to control my life, all the subtle manipulations and power plays. But the woman standing before me now, in her simple clothes and uncertain smile, was someone new. Or maybe someone who'd been buried under wealth and pretense for too long. "I'd like that," I said. Don approached Clyde near the door. "Son, about the company." "Dad," we agreed. "No, listen." Don took a deep breath. "You were right to walk away, to start fresh. I'm proud of you." Clyde stared at his father, then pulled him into a tight hug. I saw Don's shoulders shake slightly. As the evening wound down, we stood on our porch watching Don and Margaret drive away in their modest new car. Their downsized life seemed to suit them better than their mansion ever had. "Think they'll really change?" I asked Clyde. "They already have." He wrapped his arm around me. "We all have." Inside, our house held the lingering warmth of genuine conversation and honest laughter. No power plays, no hidden agendas, just the foundation of something authentic taking root. I touched my stomach again, thinking of the nursery upstairs and the future it represented. Not a legacy built on money and manipulation, but one built on truth and trust. "Ready to clean up?" Clyde asked. "In a minute." I leaned into him, taking in our home, really ours now, in every way that mattered. "Let's just stay here for a moment." The autumn breeze carried the scent of turning leaves and new beginnings. Sometimes, I realized, you have to tear everything down to build something real, something that lasts, something like home.